Linda Hogan has finally broken her silence about Hulk Hogan and she's revealing far more than fans expected. From the painful truth about their chaotic marriage to one chilling admission about his secret health battle, her words are changing how people see Hulk's final years. Let me break it down. 4 days, that's how long Linda Hogan waited before she said anything at all about the man she'd been married to for 26 years. 4 days after the retired wrestling star died on July 24. At the age of 71, the late WWE legend's ex-wife broke her silence on his passing, writing in the comments section of a July 19 Instagram post that featured a throwback picture of the two of them. She didn't post something new. She went back to an old photo, one she'd shared under the caption, "The Good Old Days," and left a comment that read like a confession. "I had no idea he would pass away this soon," she wrote. "We all really thought he would make a comeback. Big surprise, we are all devastated. It's hitting me so hard." That alone would have been enough to make headlines. A woman who divorced her husband under ugly, public circumstances, still shaken more than 15 years later by his death. But she kept typing. "I loved Hulkster more than he loved me," she wrote. "It hurt when he cheated, but he was so famous. I sort of understood, but it was crushing. It hurt." Then came the part that really stopped people scrolling. "I've been weeping all day," she added. "The finality, it's just shocking. We spent every minute together for so many years. Not we used to, not back then." She said they were still somehow connected. She went on to note that the family rift left her feeling broken, writing, "We still were family," and that it was hard to know he was just gone. That she tried to stay strong for their son Nick but couldn't. She closed it out with a line that sounded almost like a wedding vow, not a breakup statement. "I love you, Hulkster," she wrote. "You were my man. The only man for me. R.I.P. Now here's where it gets strange. This was a woman who, just months earlier, had gone public, calling her ex-husband a sex addict and a complete liar, saying their family was falling apart. She publicly called Hulk a sex addict and complete liar, and said their family was a complete mess in an Instagram video in March. That's the same year, that's the same woman. And then he dies and all of that hostility gets replaced by a message that reads like grief for a soulmate. But the real gut punch didn't come in that Instagram comment. It came later when Linda sat for a camera as part of Hulk's final documentary project and said something that, once you know what came out about his health in the weeks after his death, sounds less like sentimentality and more like she knew something the rest of the family didn't. Talking about the two of them, about the years of silence between them since the divorce, Linda said plainly that despite everything, her feelings never disappeared. Now 66 years old, she spoke out during the documentary about how she still felt love for him despite everything that happened, saying it doesn't go away. "I wish things would have turned out differently for us." And then the line that changes the whole complexion of the story. "But then when he got sick, I realized that my love never faded for him." When he got sick, not when he passed. Not when I heard the news, when he got sick. Here's why that single sentence matters so much. Days after Hulk Hogan died, medical records tied to his death revealed something the public had never heard before, that he'd been quietly battling chronic lymphocytic leukemia, a form of cancer of the blood and bone marrow that affects white blood cells, which is typically labeled chronic due to its slow progression, and that his diagnosis with the disease was not publicly known before his death. Reporters confirmed it wasn't something Hogan had ever spoken about. Despite his mega fame, Hulk Hogan suffered from a disease that he kept hidden from the public. So when Linda talks about when he got sick, realizing her love never faded, she's not talking about the heart attack that killed him in July. That was sudden, unexpected, the kind of thing that ends a life in a single afternoon. She's talking about something that unfolded over time, something quiet, something that, based on everything reported since, his own daughter didn't even know about. That's the revelation sitting at the center of this story. Not a scandal, not an accusation, but a woman who spent decades either married to or feuding with Hulk Hogan, revealing almost in passing that she was led into a part of his decline that the rest of his family was kept out of. And once you start pulling that thread, the whole last chapter of Hulk Hogan's life starts looking very different. Because remember, this is a man who sat for one more interview before he died, stripped down and honest in a way he'd never been on camera before. And in that interview, he wasn't talking about wrestling, he was talking about Linda, about what she did to him, about a bathroom floor, a gun, and the lowest point of his entire life. Before anyone knew about the leukemia, before Brooke started asking questions, there was a camera in a room with Hulk Hogan months before he died, and he decided to say things out loud that he'd apparently spent over a decade burying. It became part of a Netflix documentary. Never one to hold back, Hogan sat down for a final, candid interview, just months before his death, airing on Netflix, under the title Hulk Hogan, Real American. The series ran 4 parts, and it wasn't a highlight reel. It was Hogan, older, slower, talking about the collapse of his marriage to Linda like it was the wound that never closed. He didn't dance around what the divorce did to him. Hogan shared that the divorce led him to financial struggles, losing a significant portion of his savings, and faced backlash for a controversial comment referencing O.J. Simpson, which took a toll on his mental health. He told Rolling Stone at the time he was taking the high road by not doing the O.J. Simpson thing, a comment that landed about as badly as you'd expect, given what that comparison actually references, and one that much of the public felt was inappropriate, leading to Hogan receiving a lot of harsh backlash. That took a toll on him mentally. Then he told the camera exactly how far down that spiral went. He described handing over the bulk of what he'd built. According to Entertainment Weekly, he revealed that he hit rock bottom as a result of the divorce and gave Linda 70% of his fortune, saying, "I gave her everything to get rid of her." And then he described what happened after, drinking pills, a night that ended somewhere he never expected to end up. Hogan revealed that he even considered suicide in the wake of the divorce, saying he went home, started drinking, started eating pills, went down a rabbit hole for a couple of days, and the next thing he knew, he was sitting in front of his bathroom, with a gun in his mouth, not knowing what he was doing. That's not a man talking about heartbreak in the abstract. That's a specific physical memory, a bathroom, a gun, a blackout he can't fully account for. And the thing that pushed him there, in his own telling, was the divorce from Linda. He didn't stop at the money, he talked about drugs too, in numbers that stunned even people used to hearing wrestlers. Talk about pain management. "I was taking 80 mg fentanyls. 2 in the morning, stuffing them under my gums here," Hogan said. "I had 2 300 mg patches of fentanyl on my legs, and they gave me 6 1,500 mg fentanyl lollipops to eat." A pharmacist, he said, looked at what he was consuming and told him flatly he shouldn't be alive. "I went to the pharmacy," he goes, "you should be dead. We have never seen a human being take this much fentanyl." He tied it directly to the same collapse, the same divorce, the same financial wound. Hogan felt he needed to keep performing because his divorce left him broke. Longtime friend Eric Bischoff, who brought Hogan into total non-stop action wrestling, right after the split, remembered it as the darkest stretch of his life, saying Hogan was down and hurting, and Hogan himself called that new job the thing that saved him, because he had nothing left. Then there was the part that clearly still ate at him years later. Watching Linda move on, Linda quickly rebounded with him, 29 years her junior, and although they later broke up, this bothered Hulk Hogan a lot. "It was thrown in my face big time," Hogan said, according to People. "She was bouncing around, flying all over with her boyfriend, who actually went to school with Nick and Brooke," he added. Linda didn't deny any of it. In fact, she gave her own account of exactly how young that relationship really was. Linda spoke about the relationship, saying she asked him how old he was and he said 25. And it wasn't until she asked him out for a beer that he admitted he wasn't even of legal drinking age. "Now I really have fallen for this guy," and I go, "How old really are you?" And he goes, "I'm 19. Picture that timeline for a second. A man in his 50s, freshly divorced, giving away the majority of his fortune, spiraling into fentanyl use so extreme. A pharmacist warned him he shouldn't still be breathing. While on the other side of that same collapse, his ex-wife is dating a teenager. 2 people, 1 divorce, 2 completely different trajectories. And yet, in that same documentary, sitting across from cameras, Linda didn't talk about any of that with satisfaction or distance. "We no longer spoke to each other, but I realized I still love him," he said in the trailer for the project. She wasn't performing grief for an audience that already knew he was gone. This was filmed while he was still alive, while the wounds from that divorce were still, by her own admission in other interviews, raw enough to call him a liar in public just months before. That's the tension sitting underneath this entire story. 2 people who spent a decade after their split trading accusations in public, who called each other names in front of cameras, who built entirely separate lives. And somewhere underneath all of it, according to both of them in their own words, something never actually ended. So the question becomes, what happens next in that story? Because the divorce that broke Hulk Hogan financially, and by his own account nearly killed him, didn't come out of nowhere. It had a build-up, a slow unraveling that played out for years. In public, on a reality show that once made this family famous for being close. To understand why Linda Hogan's words carried so much weight after his death, you have to go back to how public this marriage actually was. Because very few couples let cameras into their divorce the way the Hogans did. Linda Hogan and Hulk Hogan tied the knot in 1983, and were together all through the wrestlers' 1980s and 90s heyday. For over 2 decades, Linda was the wife standing next to the most recognizable wrestler on the planet. Through the Hulkamania boom, through WrestleMania main events, through a level of fame very few entertainers ever touch. The former couple appeared with their 2 kids on the VH1 reality series, Hogan Knows Best, which premiered in 2005 and ran for 4 seasons. That show sold the family as functional, goofy, loud, but tight. Then it started coming apart, and it came apart, in full view of cameras and tabloids. They split in 2007 and finalized their divorce in 2009. What looked like a fun reality show ending. The divorce was very messy, and a settlement wasn't finalized for 2 years. Hogan had denied infidelity publicly at the time. Hulk Hogan denied cheating in his memoir, My Life Outside the Ring, published in 2009. But in the years and interviews that followed, including that final documentary, he stopped denying it. And Linda, for her part, never really let it go either. Even in the same breath where she said she loved him more than he loved her, she brought the affairs right back up. I loved Hulkster more than he loved me, she wrote after his death. It hurt when he cheated, but he was so famous. I sort of understood, but it was crushing. It hurt. That's not closure, that's a wound that stayed open for close to 2 decades. The financial fallout is what really shaped the rest of Hogan's life, though. This wasn't a quiet, negotiated separation. It was framed by Hogan himself as something closer to a hostage situation he needed to buy his way out of. He revealed he hit rock bottom as a result of the divorce, giving Linda 70% of his fortune, and saying, "I gave her everything to get rid of her," 70%. Of a fortune built over 3 decades of main eventing wrestling's biggest stages. And it wasn't just money that Hogan felt like he lost. It was status, control, even his sense of who was watching him fall apart. He talked about the humiliation of watching Linda's next relationship play out publicly, tied to people connected to his own children's lives. "It was thrown in my face big time," Hogan said. "She was bouncing around, flying all over with her boyfriend, who actually went to school with Nick and Brooke," he added. Meanwhile, the family that Hogan Knows Best had sold to America as functional was fracturing along every possible line. The family began to fracture following Hulk and Linda's 2009 split, and it never fully reassembled. Brooke and Nick, the 2 kids who grew up on camera with their parents, ended up living almost entirely separate relationships with each side of that broken marriage. Nick stayed close to his father for the rest of his life, later calling him his best friend and mentor. Brooke's relationship with Hulk went cold years before his death. She'd stopped speaking to him well before he passed, and she skipped his 2023 wedding to his 3rd wife, writing that she needed distance for her own healing. Linda's relationship with her own daughter didn't survive much better. In a video posted to her Instagram stories months before Hulk died, Linda admitted the estrangement had spread to her too. With Brooke welcoming twins with her husband, "She doesn't talk to us," Linda revealed, saying she's had twins, she got married, she didn't tell us. She had a huge fight with Terry. "I don't know how that reflected onto me, but she cut me out too." So by the time Hulk Hogan sat down for that final interview, here's the actual shape of his world. A marriage that ended in humiliation and near bankruptcy. A son who stayed loyal, a daughter who'd walked away from both parents, and an ex-wife who, despite years of public sniping, was apparently still close enough to his day-to-day life that she knew things about his health that his own daughter didn't. That's the part that makes Linda's chilling comment sit differently than a simple expression of grief. This wasn't a woman speculating from a distance about what her ex-husband might have been going through. Her words, "When he got sick, I realized my love never faded," imply a level of awareness that requires actual contact, actual knowledge, actual proximity to a health situation that the public and even his own children weren't let in on. Which brings the story to the part almost nobody was talking about until after Hogan was already gone. The secret he apparently managed to keep from almost everyone for years, while going through multiple surgeries, while appearing on podcasts, while doing interviews about his aches and pains, all without ever mentioning the one diagnosis that turned out to matter most. Here's the detail that turned Linda's comment from a sentimental aside into something people started replaying. Hulk Hogan had cancer. Nobody outside a very small circle knew. Hogan died of an acute myocardial infarction, commonly known as a heart attack. And medical records released by the district medical examiner also revealed that he had a history of leukemia and atrial fibrillation, specifically chronic lymphocytic leukemia, a form of cancer of the blood and bone marrow that affects the group of white blood cells called lymphocytes. The heart attack is what killed him. The leukemia is what stunned everyone once the paperwork came out. His leukemia diagnosis had not been publicly disclosed before his death. Not to fans, not to the wrestling world, that had watched him do podcast appearances just months earlier, talking about back surgeries and joint replacements. Not, as it turned out, even to his own daughter. Brooke Hogan learned about her father's cancer diagnosis the same way the rest of the world did, through medical documents released after he was already gone. And her reaction wasn't grief mixed with acceptance. It was confusion bordering on suspicion. In her interview, Brooke shared she hadn't known about the cancer diagnosis and wondered how the information could have been missed over the years. When Hulk underwent multiple surgeries, saying, "That's what has me puzzled. Because they're saying, oh, he had leukemia, and I saw his blood work every time." Think about what that actually means. Brooke wasn't a distant relative hearing second-hand rumors. She was close enough to her father's medical situation, at least at some point, to have seen his blood work directly. And even she couldn't square how a cancer diagnosis stayed invisible through what was reportedly close to 24 surgical procedures. In an appearance on Jake Paul's Impulsive podcast in September 2024, Hogan revealed he'd had 25 surgeries in the previous 10 years, including 10 back surgeries, procedures on both shoulders, and knee and hip replacements on both sides. 25 surgeries. Chronic lymphocytic leukemia doesn't typically hide itself from routine blood work. It's a disease that shows up in blood counts long before it becomes clinically dangerous, which is part of why doctors describe it as slow-moving in the first place. This type of leukemia is labeled chronic due to its slow progression, and often only requires treatment months or years after diagnosis. That slow-moving nature is exactly what makes it plausible someone could carry the diagnosis for years without announcing it, but it's also exactly what made Brooke's confusion so pointed. If it had been sitting in his labs the whole time, somebody at some point would have needed to tell him. And that's where Linda's comment lands so differently than everyone else's reaction. She wasn't confused by the leukemia news the way Brooke was. She didn't frame it as a shock or a mystery. She framed it as a moment of clarity about her own feelings, as though the illness itself wasn't news to her at all, just the final confirmation of something that was already unfolding. "But then when he got sick, I realized that my love never faded for him," she said. "Not when I found out he was sick, when he got sick. Present in the moment, watching it happen." It's worth sitting with how strange that is given everything else about their relationship at that point. This was a woman who'd called him a liar and an addict on Instagram that same year. A woman who, by all public accounts, hadn't spoken directly to Hulk in years, relying on their son Nick to relay information back and forth. "Even though I never spoke or saw him, Nick did, and Nick would tell me things and vice versa. Just news about life," she wrote. "I still love him." So by her own description, Linda's information came secondhand, filtered through Nick. And yet she still speaks about his illness with a familiarity that outpaces what his own daughter, someone who'd literally seen his labs, was able to piece together. That gap is what makes her words feel less like an ex-wife's tribute, and more like someone who had a clearer picture of Hulk Hogan's decline than almost anyone let on publicly, including the people who should have known first. It also reframes something else Linda said in that same documentary. Sitting for the cameras, reflecting on a marriage that ended in fentanyl abuse, a gun in a bathroom, and a decade of public sniping. She didn't describe her feelings as complicated or conflicted. She described them as constant. "It doesn't go away," she said. "I wish things would have turned out differently for us." That's not the language of someone processing surprising news about an ex-husband's health from a distance. That's the language of someone who watched a slow decline happen, and only afterward let herself name what she was feeling while it was happening. Hulk's health in that final stretch backs up how visible the decline actually was to the people around him, even if the specific diagnosis stayed hidden. Hulk's health declined in the final weeks prior to his passing. He was suffering from shortness of breath, got tired easily, had lost a lot of weight, and was on oxygen, a source close to the family said, adding that Hulk had a weak heart. Brooke referenced the same decline in her own tribute, describing years of supporting him through those 24 surgeries, before things started, in her words, getting covered in a thick veil. So there were at least two very different levels of access here. The general public and most of the wrestling world, who had no idea he was fighting cancer at all. His daughter, who saw pieces of it, blood work, surgeries, but never got the full picture and was left publicly confused after the fact. And then Linda, filtered through Nick, apparently piecing together enough to arrive at a settled, confident emotional conclusion, months before anyone else understood what getting sick even referred to. That imbalance, who knew what and when, becomes the whole engine of what happened after Hulk Hogan died. Because once the leukemia came out, once people started asking why nobody outside a tight circle had been told, the family that had already been fractured for years didn't come back together to grieve quietly. It splintered further, and it splintered specifically over the question of what actually happened in his final hours. Hulk Hogan's death should have been simple, medically speaking, a heart attack in a home with people around him. That's how it was first described, and for a while that's how it stood. The cause of death was confirmed as an acute myocardial infarction, commonly known as a heart attack. But almost immediately, Brooke Hogan started asking questions that didn't have easy answers. Within days of her father's death, she was already telling people something didn't line up. She said she received legit calls from professionals, from police officials to nurses that were supposedly with my dad on the day of his death, telling her she needed to see body cam footage and get hold of the 911 tapes because they supposedly contained information that could change the narrative. Those calls, she said, went nowhere. She's attempted to retrieve body cam footage and 911 calls regarding the incident with her father, but has been unsuccessful in securing them, and says she has zero control over the records, with Hogan's wife at the time of his death, Sky Daly, being the only one with access. Then came the detail about who was actually in the house that day. Brooke described a nurse who'd been present and who, in her telling, effectively vanished afterward. If you wanted to go and get information on what happened that day or ask the nurse, he's disappeared, Brooke said. He's scared, you can't get a hold of him. Nobody can get a hold of this guy that was there. He was the only other person that was there the day my dad died, and by her account, the timing of his absence was the whole problem. She said Sky Daly was the only other person there, and that, from what I've been told, the nurse was upstairs fixing the toilet or doing something like that, adding that while he was gone, her dad just passes and Sky is the one to notice that he stopped breathing. Even the basic physical account of his death started to shift depending on who Brooke talked to. One of her biggest concerns involved conflicting accounts of where he was found. My brother told me and my husband, we both heard it, that he died in his chair. Then the report says they found him on the floor. Who found him on the floor? Where were the nurses? Where were they coming back from? Why was Sky the only witness to him not breathing? The autopsy became its own separate fight. It didn't happen the way high-profile deaths usually get handled. An autopsy wasn't conducted immediately following Hogan's death. The guy's been dead since July 25th or whenever, and they never initially did an autopsy, only doing one after he'd already been embalmed. A private autopsy was eventually done for the family, but it was commissioned by others in Hogan's family, and those results were never shared with Brooke. Nearly a year later, she said the report was still being edited. She claimed she was told by the chief of police that the doctor who conducted the independent autopsy was still making changes to the report months after her father's death. Apparently, the doctor who did the independent autopsy was making changes as of Sunday. There were smaller inconsistencies too, the kind that pile up until they stop looking like coincidences. Brooke pointed to several issues she said still didn't add up, including being told at one point there were no blood samples available, only to later hear investigators found nothing suspicious in Hulk's blood, and that police records released to the public contained redactions related to prescriptions Hulk was taking for pain and sleep. Medications, she said, didn't appear in the toxicology findings. She also couldn't understand a basic procedural choice. She questioned why Hulk's death certificate was signed by his personal physician, rather than someone from the medical examiner's office. Eventually, Clearwater police closed the case. Nearly a year after Hulk Hogan's passing, police announced they had concluded their investigation and found no evidence of criminal wrongdoing. Having reviewed relevant statements, medical records, and surveillance footage from Hogan's home, along with a visual inspection of his body, finding no indication his death was anything other than natural, Brooke wasn't satisfied. She told TMZ she believed police missed the mark by not immediately launching a thorough investigation the moment her father died, saying there's been a lot of inconsistencies from the beginning. Sitting alongside all of that noise is Linda, the one person in this entire story who never publicly questioned any of it. No demands for body cam footage, no fights over autopsy results. Just a woman who, months before any of these questions existed, had already said out loud that she understood what was happening to him before it became public record. That's really the shape of what's left once you follow this all the way through. A daughter still fighting a year later to get basic answers about how her father actually died. A cancer diagnosis that stayed hidden from almost everyone who should have known. A marriage that ended in a bathroom with a gun and 70% of a fortune, and yet somehow produced the one person in Hulk Hogan's life who claims she never stopped understanding him right up until the moment he was gone. Linda never explained exactly how she knew what she knew or when she knew it. She just said it plainly, almost as an afterthought, in the middle of a documentary about a man who spent his whole public life performing certainty and control, and in a family still arguing about surveillance footage and redacted prescriptions a year later. Her handful of quiet words might be the closest thing anyone has to a straight answer about what Hulk Hogan's last chapter actually looked like from the inside. Netflix's Hulk Hogan interview stuns fans with shock revelations about wife Linda, Pill's Men's Journal. Hulk Hogan's ex Linda Hogan breaks silence on his shocking death. News. Hulk Hogan's ex-wife Linda breaks silence in emotional post calling him the only man for her today. Linda Hogan opens up after Hulk Hogan's sudden death. Linda Hogan addresses late ex-husband Hulk Hogan's death for first time. Fox News. Hulk Hogan considered suicide after hitting rock bottom amid bitter divorce from first wife Linda. Yahoo. Hulk Hogan revealed he considered suicide in final interview before death. Yahoo. Hulk Hogan privately battled leukemia before his death. News. Hulk Hogan's cause of death revealed. Newsweek. Hulk Hogan's secret health battle revealed 1 week after his tragic death. Parade. Yahoo. Hulk Hogan secretly battled leukemia before his death at 71. Page 6. Yahoo. Hulk Hogan cause of death. Legendary wrestler suffered heart attack as well as cancer battle with leukemia. CBS Sports. Hulk Hogan's secret health battle revealed after medical examiner's report is made public. IMDb. Brooke Hogan shares suspicions over Hulk Hogan's death in rare interview. News. Brooke Hogan reveals troubling details she says don't add up about Hulk Hogan's death. Brooke Hogan says cops missed the mark and Hulk Hogan death probe. TMZ. Brooke Hogan raises suspicions and questions about Hulk Hogan's death. Men's Journal. Brooke Hogan isn't buying official details in Hulk Hogan death investigation. WrestleZone. Hulk Hogan's eerie words in final interview before his death revealed. News. Hulk Hogan's haunting last interview words out before his death. Goombastomp.